So let's now make sure we can listen to a click on this delete button. In vanilla JavaScript, so in just JavaScript without React, we would find a way of selecting this button, for example with document query selector button. And then once we got hold of this DOM object, we could add a click listener with add event listener. Now this is again an imperative approach. We describe what should happen. With React, we rather use a declarative approach describing the target result. And hence this is not code we write in React. Instead, with React, if we want to listen to a click on this button, we add an extra attribute on this button. And for this, it's important to understand that all these default HTML elements are in the end also just React components. Just React components that are built into React already. So they look like regular HTML elements and you use them like regular HTML elements, but under the hood, these are components. And that matters because that means that you can add certain attributes which you could not add like this, at least with just HTML. For example, on a button, or actually on any HTML element here in JSX, you can add an onClick attribute written like this: lowercase o, uppercase c, and the casing does matter. Unlike in regular HTML, here it does matter. Now when you add the onClick prop, as it's called, as you learned, to a button or to any other element, you're telling React that you want to react to a click on that element. Now, the value you assign for this attribute is then not some text, not a string, but instead a dynamic expression which should hold a function that should be executed when a click occurs. So here we could define an anonymous inline function like this, or also with the arrow function syntax, which you can use in modern JavaScript, or you point at another function. And I'll do the latter. I'll create a new function, and, important, I'll create it as a nested function inside of the to-do function. And that might look weird, but that's actually standard JavaScript. In JavaScript, also without React, you can define functions inside of functions. So here I'll add a function inside of the to-do function, inside of that to-do function component, and we could name this delete handler. The function name is totally up to you. I personally like this convention where functions which are executed upon events end with handler, but other people don't use that, but instead might use handle delete or just delete. Totally up to you. I'll go with delete handler here and then point at this function as a value here for this onClick prop, simply by repeating the function name here. And now here is an extremely important thing to keep in mind. You don't execute the function here, so no parentheses. If you would execute it here, this function would be executed as soon as JavaScript and React evaluates this code. So when this line of code is evaluated, the function would execute. Now that is too early though. We want to execute the function when the button is clicked, not when that code is evaluated by JavaScript, because that happens right before that content is rendered in the browser. Hence, we just point at this function by just using its name here, and that just tells React in the end that it's this function that should be executed when this element is clicked. And now in here we can do whatever we want. For example, we can console log clicked here for the moment. And if we do that and save this, if I go to the JavaScript console in the DevTools, if we click one of these delete buttons, doesn't matter which one you click, you see clicked. Now we could also output clicked and then as an extra log props.text, so that text value which we receive via props, which I also output down there in the h2 tag. I'm now referring to it again here, because this is just standard JavaScript in the end, even though this JSX code definitely doesn't look like it. But up here, we write standard JavaScript, and hence, of course, here we can also use one of our arguments. And if that argument turns out to be an object, which props is, we can also drill into that object here. And with that, if I save this and click delete, you see the proper text being output here as well. And maybe it's not clear here, but that's another strength of React. Without any extra work from our side, these 3 different buttons are doing different things. I mean, they're always doing the same thing. We just defined this logic once, but the concrete values with which they work, the concrete text which they output, is not the same. Instead, it's different for every button. And that means that we can easily write logic that's specific to a specific to-do, whilst still being able to define this logic once instead of 3 times, which is great and makes our code way more reusable. But of course, here the goal is not to log something to the console. Instead, we want to show a little overlay when that button is clicked. And for this, of course, we need to, first of all, create that overlay. We need to create the HTML code that should be showing up. And then as a second step, we also need to find a way of showing it conditionally.